You are listening to Book Clips, a mini podcast in which authors or narrators do readings from novels. Check out the show notes for the synopsis and buy links for this book.
Hello, this is Heather Rose Jones, and I'll be reading from Mother of Souls, the third book in the Alpennia series. The Alpennia stories are set in the early 19th century in a Europe in which magic mixes with adventure and intrigue. In this scene, we see the performance of an opera written by Lucia Valerin, an opera that has magic woven into the very fabric of the music. When they arrived at the opera house, the crowd parted as Canturi escorted her through the entrance and up the grand staircase to Margaret's box. For once, his courtesies were comforting instead of teasing. The faces were a blur. Margaret, Baroness Savitre, still with her arm bound up. Jean, Mesmeric Katzelin, shadowed by young Anna Monteretz, and Serafina, of course, elegant in her crimson gown. Others she barely knew. The box was filled to the edges, as all the others were. From the other levels she could hear a hum of bright, excited voices, but the mood in Margaret's box was tense and somber. Serafina took her hand and squeezed it. "It all depends on us now." And then it began. How could one view one's own work and know if it were worthy? Her fingers knew the music as she knew her own face, but now it stood apart, like viewing a stranger in the mirror. Voices swelled as the chorus in academic robes entered from the left and parted to frame the entrance of Tancred, the welcome of the Chancellor, the joyous greeting from Gaudericus, the cold and envious asides of Theodorus. Did she dare to feel proud? Lucia turned to Serafina as the first act drew to a close, hoping to see in her face some reflection of the visions that the music stirred. Serafina was shaking her head slowly and muttering, "It isn't right." Margaret leaned toward them both and whispered, "Will it work?" "I don't know," Serafina said hollowly. "It's there. You see it? But it's just slightly out of tune, out of time. I don't know. It may not be strong enough." Lucia tried to work out what she meant. The orchestra was perfectly in tempo. No discordant notes jangled in the ear. The singers met their cues. "Can we do anything?" Margaret asked, as applause swelled around them. The audience seemed to feel no lack in the performance. Serafina rose abruptly, before the others had begun to stir and stretch. "Lucia, come with me." She led the way briskly through the corridors, now beginning to fill for the usual promenade during the interval. Comments followed them as they passed. "That's her. Meister Valerin. Where are they going? Who's the dark one? Some foreign Thaumaturgist, I hear. Meister Sovitre's student." A staircase took them down to the wings of the stage and into the orchestra, where the musicians were taking their brief ease. What did she plan? What more could be done at this point? "Meister Overman," Serafina demanded, "I must conduct." Lucia saw her father start and look affronted, but he turned to her. "Lucia?" It was in her hands. So much was in her hands, the success of the opera, everyone who had trusted in her, Margaret's mysteries, and, if they were all to be believed, so much more. No, it was in Serafina's hands. She turned and echoed Margaret's question. "Will it work?" This time Serafina answered with fierce conviction, "Yes." Lucia turned to her father. She must conduct. The orchestra were hanging on the exchange and looked to him. Serafina had led them in rehearsals, teasing out the visions that guided her as the last details of the arrangements were hammered out. This was a different matter. He bowed formally. The baton was passed. Lucia watched the second act from a chair at the side of the orchestra, where she would be in no one's way. It took much of the first duet before Serafina and the musicians had each other's measure. It didn't take mystical vision to see that something had begun out of balance. But during Theodorus's solo, when he laid out the trap by which he would either win Tancred or destroy her, it began to feel that they were moving as one again. Serafina coaxed and commanded, roused and quieted, following a score that only she could see. Lucia could feel when the music caught hold of something deeper. It wasn't in the sound, or the way the lyrics seemed to breathe life into the very air around them. It was more of a swelling feeling within her body, as if all her senses were on fire. She felt Tancred's ambition and desire within her bones. The music washed over her like the touch of a lover, caressing, demanding, bringing her to the edge of passion again and again. When the cue for the second interval came, instead of thunderous applause, there was echoing silence. The audience held their breaths, and all the world felt suspended. In an ordinary performance it would have been disastrous. Serafina looked back, almost wildly, at the ranks of spectators, their faces peering over the rails in box after box. The looming silence felt like the moment before a storm. It was a moment that must be seized. Frantically, Lucia scrambled up the steps at the edge of the stage and ducked behind the curtain. The singers turned to stare. They'd heard the empty silence and had caught something of the tension. "We need to finish it now," Lucia gasped. "Can you go on?" They looked one to another. The sets were in place. There would be a missed costume change. Benedetta Cavalli stepped forward and proclaimed, "Let the show continue." The orchestra slipped into the music for the curtain like a hand into a glove. There had been no sound from the house, not so much as a cough or the closing of a door. The tension that had begun to fray and fade stretched tight once more, like the hairs on a bow, drawing the rich tones of the violins into the waiting silence. And then Tanfret, bringing the gift of the forbidden book, like a lover offering her heart. Lucia could almost hear hundreds of voices sigh as Gaudericus launched into, "This I refuse!" And then the rising crescendo of Tanfret and Gaudericus, their voices twining in the counter-messages of, "I pledge myself to you alone." Serafina seemed to call out with her whole body, turning the music end over end as the two singers held up the black-bound volume between them, singing, "I abjure thee, I dismiss thee." The chorus, standing almost in the shadows at the rear of the stage, chanted a slowly rising echo of the duet. The horns joined the strings, and the kettle drums hammered, a heartbeat, sounding, until Serafina, her eyes on some cue not of the world, brought her arms down with a violent jerk. This time the audience erupted with a roar, a catharsis of voice and hands that filled and overflowed the hall. Whatever it was they had been meant to do had been done. They had succeeded. Lucia could feel it as a bone-deep certainty. A brief change of scene. A painted bridge of lath and canvas. Tanfret and Gaudericus meeting on the arch. Gaudericus's rejection, and then, as Tanfret reprised, "I pledged myself to you alone," the taunting by Theodorus as he left with the chorus of scholars. The tension became palpable once more as Madame Cavalli cast off the mask of spurned sweetheart and drew herself up in pride and fury. "Let the waters rise up!" It swelled just as the waters of the Rotaine would swell when the spring rains cast themselves against the mountain peaks. "Let the waters rise up!" The orchestra rose, not in trumpets and drums this time, but with a nearly imperceptible crescendo of flowing water. "And wash away my sorrow." As before, it was not the despair of an abandoned lover, not even the fury of jealousy. For how could Tanfret be jealous of Sophia, the same goddess to whom she was pledged? Madame Cavalli sang it as a paean of triumph, the final victory of Tanfret's return. It was not sorrow that was washed away, but shame, defeat, regret, all the things that had held her back in life. She didn't cast herself into the waters, but demanded that they come to claim her. Lucia could feel the power of the music, what Serafina might call the fluctus, pouring through her. In her imagination she saw it flowing through the Plights and down to the Rotaine to mingle with the waters and summon them. It was done. A soft gesture of Serafina's baton called to the bassoon, and then to Gaudericus's final aria. The soothing, mournful chorus brought the audience back to themselves. No woman past or yet to come. It was a lie in the end. Tanfret's legacy might have lain forgotten, like her bones beneath the stone in Urmai. But her work lived on. It had spurred Gaudericus to defy those who would have dismissed his theories as heresy. It had inspired Margerit Sovitre to believe that a woman could become a great thaumaturgist and to pledge herself to that same study. Perhaps she might consider rewriting that final chorus. This has been Heather Rose Jones, reading from Mother of Souls, the third volume in the Alpennia series. If you enjoyed this, check out the other two books, Daughter of Mystery and The Mystic Marriage.
You have been listening to Book Clips. Check out the show notes for the synopsis and buy links for this book. If you are interested in showcasing your novel, then check out the show notes for more information.